Do we have Councilmember Sundberg? Let's see him.
I don't see him.
Hmm.
Is
Well,
it just us again?
I know. What's going on? Did you get a chance to look at the minutes
I'm good with the minutes for approval.
as well? And they were very good minutes. They were, sorry we asked so many questions. It was a long packet of minutes. First on the agenda is the retail update. So go ahead and turn it over to Bob.
Okay, and now we're going to try this share screen part here. So share content. There we go. Share. Can you all see that?
We can.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So
Bob, can
hello,
you make it
everyone.
bigger?
Thanks for having us. We are here today to talk about the latest retail sales tax generation report. And we're also going to do new business openings, this time by ward. So that's where we're going to start. These are the new business openings for the last 12 months by ward. The GIS folks, Maritza, did a great job figuring out which addresses are in which wards. And as you can see, 5 of the 6 wards produced somewhere between 650 and 750 business openings last year, except for Ward 4, which did about 1,076. And so that is the new business openings by ward. And now let's get into the report itself. So the first thing I would have to say is all the categories have changed. And so since the categories have changed, we are going back to pre-COVID, because one of the questions we had was, how are we doing today versus before COVID? And so this is hopefully the last time we're going to be bringing up COVID in one of these presentations. But because we changed the categories, we wanted to go back and show everybody what the different categories would be. And we've expanded some of the categories. So this is the first one that we've expanded, which would be the motor vehicle sales tax category. The blue part is motor vehicle sales and auto parts, and that has continually risen over the last 4 years. Although the spike in the last year might have something to do with the higher prices of auto sales versus the amount of units that sold. The orange is gas stations, and they were consistent. They slowed down just a little bit during COVID, but then consistently increased every year afterwards. In gray, we have auto repair. And auto repair dropped during COVID because people were not driving their cars. But then as they started to drive their cars again, it popped, and then it slowed down a little bit. As you're going to see, that's a consistent trend where things have rounded off in the last year. So in yellow, we have a new category of truck, trailer, and car leasing. And those folks have also showed a pretty consistent trend for the 3 years, and then flattening out just slightly during COVID. Okay, so the next one will be home centers. Now, this used to be home improvement, where we showed just Lowe's and Home Depot and folks like that. But the category now has been expanded to include home furnishings, appliances and electronics, and that is generally called durable goods. So in blue, you'll see home furnishings rose during the shut-in and the reopening as everybody was fixing up their homes and buying new furniture, but has dipped in the last year as inflation and recession kind of fears have been bubbling up a bit. And we're going to see that a lot with everything rounding off this year. I think a lot of that has to do with everyone anticipating a recession coming. Electronics and appliances in orange increased during the COVID shut-in, dropped dramatically coming out of the shutdown, and then rose to new heights again last year. Home improvement centers, also in gray, also include window coverings, flooring stores, paint stores, nursery and garden centers, and farm supplies. They showed large increases during the COVID shut-in and at the end of restrictions, and have now started to level off as new home sales have also leveled off. And that new home sales leveling off has more to do with inventory. Prices are still high, but there isn't a lot of inventory. So the less homes sold, the less people are fixing up those homes. Okay, the next category is food and beverage retail sales. Now this breaks down into 3 different categories: supermarkets with liquor, specialty retail stores or specialty food retailers, which are like bakeries, meat markets, confectionery stores, and retail liquor stores. So the first one, grocery stores in blue, they never shut down, and their sales have increased every year for the past 4 years, with the largest increase in the last 24 months, and we'll get to that in a second. The specialty food retailers in orange, again, these are the bakeries and the confectionery and meat markets and things like that, saw a slight increase during COVID and a spike the year after COVID, but have flattened out in the last 12 months. But if you take a look at the liquor stores, so that's liquor, wine, and beer stores in gray, they stayed open, so they did well during COVID, but you'll also notice that between the second and third period, they actually lost sales as the grocery stores in blue were increasing sales, and that's because the grocery stores started selling beer and wine during that period. So you can see basically a trade-off between the liquor stores going down and basically giving those sales to the grocery stores, which is not the way they would want to say it, but that's pretty much what happened. Okay, so next the category would be health and beauty care. So pharmacies and health supplement stores is what you see in blue, and they were increasing sales all the way up until last year. Now, remember, during COVID, you were spending a lot more time in a Walgreens than you normally would because they had pretty much everything you needed. And in the last year, just think of how many times you were in a Walgreens. It has dropped off significantly, and that's why you see that drop off on the blue in the last year or so. In orange, you see the other health and personal care items, which are things like optical stores, beauty salons, barber shops, nail salons, cosmetics, beauty supplies, and perfume stores. These guys have chugged along in orange like there never was COVID. And there were a lot of rumors at the beginning of COVID that all these stores weren't going to be doing well because people weren't going back to the office. And so they didn't need makeup and they didn't need hair salons. And that did not actually turn out to be the case here. So the next category is clothing and hobby and general merchandise. Now, we used to do general merchandise as just the department stores, but that's changed now. So let's start with the clothing and accessory stores. Accessory stores are like shoe stores, handbags, jewelry, and luggage. They performed well, increasing their sales by over $1 million in sales tax volume for 3 years in a row. In the last year, that rounded off to about 700,000, and that's that same rounding off that we see everywhere. Sporting goods actually also includes music stores, hobby stores, and bookstores. And it's funny because all 4 of those were not doing well. It's amazing that they put them all together because they've had a really rough time. You can see in orange that they had moderate growth and but flattened out in the last year. Not a lot of excitement in that category. General merchandise in gray, is not only the department stores, but also has the folks like Target and Walmart in there, and all of the florists, gift shops, and office supply places, the pet stores, the art galleries. And here's an old term, mail order houses. Those are now called facilitators, but for some reason the category is called mail order houses. And all of that together had 3 years of strong growth, moderating in the last year. But the important item here is that the mail order and or online shopping, in that last year, you'll see 16 million in sales in gray. 17 million of that is online shopping. So it's almost a third of our retail sales are now online and rising every year. So that's this category. Next, we have entertainment and accommodations. So entertainment and accommodations breaks down into 3 categories: motion pictures and theaters, and that would be any theater that would be doing like the small theaters or any larger events like that. Those obviously motion pictures took a hit during COVID, but came back stronger in the last 2 years. So that's the blue category. In orange, we have sports and amusement. So that's sporting events, amusement centers, golf centers, fitness centers, and things like bowling, which are actually more general amusement now. So that category consistently grew each year for 4 years in a row. Accommodations is actually everything that is spent at a hotel that is not the hotel room and not the hotel tax. This is like them spending restaurants at the gift shop or at or spending at the restaurant, at the bar, or the gift shop. And that took a big hit during COVID, but came back strong the next year and the year following. So as you can see, The gray area has gone up higher than it was pre-COVID. Okay, next one is specialty food. Now this is restaurants and bars that break down into three different categories. There's specialty food in blue, and you can barely see it because that's just the food trucks and the caterers, which don't do much volume compared to everybody else. You can see they were flat for 2 years coming out of COVID, but they did double their sales coming out of COVID for the last 2 years. Meaning the first 2 years they were flat, and then doubled their sales for the next two. Full service restaurants in orange, which we would call sit down restaurants, and this also includes bars. Full service was up slightly during COVID, then jumped after reopening and increased again in the last 12 months. And that seems odd to me, that the sit-down restaurants that were struggling so badly during COVID seem to actually have increased their sales slightly. Not a lot. You can see much more of an increase from the second and third period. But during COVID, they were just slightly increasing. That was good news. You'll also remember the limited service restaurants in gray. That's the fast food and QSR folks, and they just killed it. You can see their numbers just went up every year like COVID never happened. Remember, the difference between fast food and quick serve is fast food is Taco Bell. You go up to the counter, you order, they hand you the bag, you go sit down. Chipotle would be quick serve. You go to the counter, you order, you go sit down, and they bring the food to you. The real difference is the quality of the food. Think of a burrito from Taco Bell versus a burrito from Chipotle. Amazingly enough, they can call both of those things burritos, but they're very different. And so that's the difference between quick serve and fast food. And let's get to the next category. Okay, so this is the overall sales tax generation for the last 4 years. Every year, consistent growth of about 20 million. And by the way, this is just the sales tax we track. This isn't the overall sales tax, this is the retail sales tax. 20 million each year for years 2 and 3, and then 12 million in the last 12 months, again, rounding off a bit. And so the difference here, though, is the facilitator tax came in right around that second period. So we should have seen a drop there in retail sales, but that's when we got all that facilitator tax. And that's when Amazon and Etsy and all those guys had to pay the tax instead of each individual player. So that is a big reason why that second period was an increase in sales instead of the decrease we thought we were going to see. Okay, now we have a chart that we thought was a brilliant chart until we looked at it a little closer. We had it in the presentation, but only look at the blue line here, which is the net rental rates. So you can see as COVID hit, rental rates dropped significantly as vacancies jumped, but then rental rates kind of consistently started to chug up into the mid-19s, close to $20 range. The vacancy rate is not accurate because that's just the vacancy rate that CoStar produces based on buildings they have on their website or on their listing service. That doesn't include all buildings that are fully leased. So that vacancy rate's just an off number. We couldn't pull it. We had this presentation in a little early. So anyway, just look at the rental rates going up. That's good news because rental rates track sales. So sales go up, rental rates go up. All right, and then here's a little bit of the news that we had this year. Of course, Safeway and King Soopers are merging. We're still waiting to see what's going to happen with some of the Safeways that are very close to King Soopers. Nordstrom's Rack opened down in Southlands, and so did Lululemon. Bolero is on its way. We have 2 of the new restaurants that are opening in the restaurant program, the Japanese restaurant on Havana, and we have down in the lower corner, you'll see Cerebral Brewing, which has the brewery open and is now building out their tap room. And we have all the small restaurants from the center that was the Parkside Center that was having some trouble. They're now back in action. People have moved back into that building. And so the 4 in the lower corner are the players that we were helping get through the downtime period. So that's the whole presentation. Questions?
Wow. Questions?
That was 20 minutes when I did it.
Yeah, that was
quick. Faster.
I have a comment and a question.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Bob, for all that information. It's sad to hear about independent liquor stores losing ground to supermarkets because they're often owned by mom and pop immigrant owners that have put their life savings and hopes and dreams into owning such a business, but it's just the way it is, I guess. And then with respect to the increase in sales tax revenue, Bob, I was wondering how much of that is due to inflation on goods and services rather than an increase in the sales of goods and services.
Right. I would say that a significant amount of it had to do with inflation because it wasn't, we don't have unit sales from these folks. They just give us the sales tax, but there has been pretty significant inflation during that time. And it doesn't seem to have really, it's leveled off a little bit, but when you have the inflation fears and the recession fears combined, you have a tendency to slow things down. So, but I would say inflation definitely was a big part of that. If you took a look at I forget, there was one statistic where someone came out and said we did much more volume, but we didn't sell one more unit. And I can't remember which category that was in, but that was all over Bloomberg for about 2 days when they announced that. So that shows exactly what you're saying. On the liquor thing, very concerned about that because those are mom and pop stores in general, the smaller ones. We have a lot of folks looking at 100,000 square foot liquor stores now because now they can open multiple versions of that. And so those are the guys that are going after the grocers, and the small guys, sadly, are going to get eaten alive. The only thing they can hang on to right now is liquor. So beer and wine is being sold in grocery stores, but not hard liquor. So we have talked to a few of these folks, and we looked at their merchandise mix, and we said you really should be kind of focusing on the hard liquor because you're competing directly with the big boys on the beer and wine, and that's going to be hard to compete. And so you do see that in the grocery sales. They took an entire aisle and turned it into beer and wine, and now all of a sudden they have a very active aisle that they didn't have active before. It used to be like seasonal stuff. And so it is a little taken from Peter to pay Paul, but and we are sad about that for the smaller folks.
Councilmember Lawson?
Yes, thank you, Bob. This is a great presentation. I just have a general question. So on the map you gave all of the businesses by ward, how many businesses have come into each ward. Do you have an idea of, or is there a map or something you could tell, maybe this could be a later presentation or something, about how many businesses have left each ward, just so you could see a comparison? Like, I'm just saying, let me just give Ward 5 because I live in Ward 5. Okay, so we have 669 businesses, but we've had some businesses that have left and some, some big retail businesses have left in some of the big shopping areas. So I'm just wondering the apples to oranges comparison about 669 businesses have come in, big and small, but how many have actually left as well?
The tricky part about that is that most people who shut their businesses down don't renew their licenses, but there's like a 12-month lag in like when their license comes up. And then we have folks that just don't report whether they shut down, but they keep their LLC open. Like they shut their business down, but they want to keep that LLC going. So that's the thing we're looking at. If they close their LLC, we know they closed. So we can give you how many businesses didn't renew their license. If we kept that number consistent, and that's what we reported, then you would see a trend as long as we use the same numbers each time. So we could try to figure that out.
Oh, so it's a renewal of licenses. So for example, over in Arapahoe Crossing by the baby store, that the big retail store closed. So is that part of the licensing, or is that just a business that closed because they were part of Best Buy? Best Buy has closed. I mean, not Best Buy, I'm sorry, Bed Bath Beyond. So, and then Bed Bath Beyond has closed. So is that part of that licensing, or just businesses that have went to online?
Right, that gets a little tricky, and we might have to ask Trevor about that because
I was just curious on that.
The tricky part is like some of these guys will report sales. 4 of the businesses, like 4 King Supers, might combine all their sales, and then if one of those King Supers closes, I assume we would see the license for that particular King Super go away, but the other ones would still be there. So depending on how they report to us, I'm not sure if they report individually or combined, but we can come up with some version of that number as long as everybody understands it is a sort of a lagging number that we have to sort of, we'll be telling you kind of who closed a year ago by the time we get a full year's worth of numbers. But again, some people close and keep their LLCs open. So as long as we understand the caveats, we can come up with something that would give you that number.
Councilmember Bergan, can I just do one final question? So if that's the case, what you're stating in these big box stores that are kind of like happening in Ward 5, for example, and some of the strip mall areas, then how do you go out and get new businesses? They just sit there then? I
How do
mean,
we get new business into a vacant space?
yeah, I mean, if they're owned by what you're saying and the license, if this is an LLC and they haven't closed their business, then how does the city of Aurora even make any type of progress in trying to fill these spaces if they're
Oh,
owned? And so I
okay.
guess I'm just trying to understand, and that this could be another topic. I can maybe talk to you a little bit offline, but I guess I'm just a little confused about we have a lot of vacant spaces, and a lot of these are big box stores, even in Corner Star. But you're saying that if the license isn't closed, then they just sit there? How do we?
No, those are probably two very
Okay,
separate situations.
okay,
So a lease, if they leave a space and they basically give back their lease or they don't renew their
okay,
lease and they leave, when they actually shut the LLC down, maybe like an annual, they're waiting, for a period of time and then they shut the LLC down. So it won't exactly align, but as long as you look at a 12-month period and keep using that same 12-month period, which should be pretty consistent. But when it comes to vacancies, we know about the vacancies. That's the stuff that CoStar tracks.
okay,
So yeah, and we're always trying to fill the big box vacancies because they generate so much sales tax volume and they have so many employees.
okay. Thank you for differentiating that. I just probably got a little confused on that. So thank you.
And then, thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed having the different categories defined. The 1/3 of our sales is online.
Just
So
about.
has that pretty much, you said that was on the increase. So it was like when we started the market facilitator tax, we've been tracking it. So do you see that continuing to actually eat up more than the 1/3?
Yeah, we expect that to continue to chip away at it. We saw the big increase, but now it's going to just constantly chip away at it until we find that equilibrium between shopping online and shopping in stores. And as we talked about last time, if you're not shopping in the store, they know who you are. They know that you shop in their store. They know that you shop online. If you keep shopping online, they're going to close the store because they don't need the store if you just buy it online. So it reminds us to continually go into stores, show your face, buy something, and then you can also buy online and they'll keep the store open.
Yeah, it kind
But
of
that,
goes back to Councilmember Lawson's question with the vacant stores. You know, if they're at corporate office seeing the online sales, they may not have the incentive to, to keep it open. So, and then with the incentive that I had sponsored, that helped us with Nordstrom and Boleros, obviously that extends to any vacant space in the city if we were able to get a desirable tenant.
I'm sorry, someone walked into my office and started
Oh.
talking. I couldn't hear that whole question. Could you say that again?
I was just talking about the incentive that I sponsored where we were able to do an incentive
Right.
for vacant space. Again, if we have vacant space, we can use that incentive policy.
Oh, yes.
As long as it's a desirable tenant that we want to bring in, that will be a catalyst for more.
Absolutely. We can do
That's
that.
available for the whole city.
Right. When you guys okayed that, it opened it up to the whole city. We were testing it in Southlands as the first one because we had a deal that was right there, but we can do that in any ward.
Okay, I just want to bring that up. I think that's all I had. On the car leasing,
Mhm.
had we not tracked that before? Was it just
No,
lumped in with auto sales or?
we actually, for some reason, we didn't really consider auto sales to be pure retail. So we used to do just pure retail categories, but then we took a look at the overall sales tax and we were missing a lot of it. So we opened up the categories this time and brought everybody in. And so we're just addressing the whole market, not just the sort of retailers. Like we don't go after car dealers. We don't go after parts stores. They just show up.
Right.
So we were trying to differentiate between the folks that we have something to do with versus the ones that, show up and produce sales tax.
And then my last point was on the liquor store losing revenues to the grocery stores. And you said it's kind of swapped, exchange of sales tax or of sales. However, and I'm guilty of buying some wine at King Supers versus my normal liquor store. But the prices are also, you see the prices are lower. So from that perspective, it unfortunately does hurt that small liquor store because, if you're like, well, I can pay $2 less for a bottle of wine at the grocery store versus the other. So do you see that we're going to actually have a decrease in our sales tax because they're lowering the prices? So if everybody's buying the same amount, but the prices are lower, then obviously our sales is lower.
Right. But the big kicker is that when they get into that supermarket, they're not just buying liquor. So they're increasing the average ticket item that a person buying liquor would normally just walk in, buy liquor, walk out. Now they're going to a grocery store, buying liquor, and then buying 4 or 5 other things. So we're getting a higher ticket average out of the grocery stores selling liquor than we would out of the liquor store. Again, we're not necessarily happy about trading these off, but it's not a one-to-one trade-off. Yes, they do sell it at a lower price, but they do higher volume. And they also get higher ticket sales because they get everything else in the store.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation.
No problem. Anytime.
All right. Any other questions? Sorry, I didn't want to cut off anybody. No? Okay. All right. We'll move on to the office market update by Yuri. Oh, no. Yeah, it's Yuri.
Yeah, it's Yuri and I will open it up. So thank you very much for having us. I just wanted to preface the presentation by saying that we're going to do a sort of a very high level presentation talking about the things that we're giving you some statistics about the Aurora office market vis-a-vis other markets within other office markets in the region, and where we think that's going, what the trends are that we're seeing, because this isn't set yet. A lot of change occurred in the office market, as you know, during the pandemic, and it's only just reverberating through the market now. So with that, I'm going to start by giving you a description of the Aurora office market. Next slide, please, Crystal. Thank you. So what we have on here is on the left is office market statistics. In Aurora, we have approximately 10,500,000 square feet of office space. Virtually none of this number has been added other than medical office buildings and related things on the Fitzsimmons campus since 2005, with the notable exceptions, both of which are Class A office spaces, Corporex and the Children's Building across the street from the campus. I'll point out that the Denver Central Business District, the CBD, and the Denver Tech Center in Greenwood Village are nearly 4 times as large as the Aurora market. They tend to they're each 4 times as large. And why that is because they have much larger, more square foot office buildings than we have. So right now, our office building, we have by class and type, you can see we have 25%, which is an increase slightly because we had so little before, and we added since 2005 a couple of buildings, including some buildings on campus, as well as Children's and Corporex, right? It is 25%. Class B is 65%, and C space is 10%. We actually think it's probably a little higher, but this is the space where we're losing ground in our market, which is a good thing because better space rents faster. And our rates have gone up, and that's a good thing as well. In the last, just anecdotally, in the last 16 years when I first got here, we were down in the $15–16 a square foot, and you can see we're up at 23.25 average, and that's because newer space goes for more, and we saw that all along the way. That when we would build newer space, it would go for a lot more, and it would bring up rates in some of the other, because in some of the other classes as well, because in order to keep up, people are improving their space a little bit. So our vacancy rate is 9.6. Back on leasing rates, I just wanted to compare the 23-25. We're usually about 75 to 80 cents on the dollar lower than Denver. Denver's rate is basically 28.25. And that difference continues to this day. Our vacancy rate is 9.6. This is the highest since the pandemic started, but it kind of keeps us at our 10-year average. So it's really not as bad as that might sound. In the different classifications, we end up seeing different vacancy rates as well. What I will say is the difference has to do with our space. So most of Aurora's spaces are smaller users and smaller spaces. We had about 1,865 companies listed as office tenants in Aurora, and only 200 of those 1,800 occupy more than 5,000 square feet. So this is the difference between the markets. Like, our market is really different than the tech center or downtown. They are larger buildings, and this is why their vacancy rate is higher. They are a lot larger buildings with tenants that took up much more square footage per office. Think, a larger company like a law firm that might have 2 or 3 floors in an office building, in an office tower. And our market is smaller businesses of less than about 11% of our market is spaces less than 5,000 square feet per office user. Okay. So, and about a third of our market are between a median of like 1,500 square feet and 3,000 square feet. And we only have like 22 buildings that are larger than 100,000 square feet, other than, the City of Aurora office building, which is, by the way, one of the biggest the City of Aurora's building is one of the biggest office buildings, Class A, by the way, biggest office buildings in the market, actually. So, and the facilities at Fitzsimmons, which are generally larger. So, so what ends up happening in the downtown market in particular, and the DTC, is that they have these larger buildings, and as companies have downsized during the pandemic, when people went remote and people started working remotely, their space is not as full, and so their vacancy rates, that's why their vacancy rates are naturally higher, because they had these lots bigger tenants that they were there. So now Yuri's going to talk a little bit about the characteristics, absorption, and things like that we're seeing in the market. Yuri?
Thanks, Andrea, and good morning, committee members and chair. Thanks for having me, and really appreciate the partnership with Andrea too. Just want to bring that up. And I just wanted to hit, and maybe I missed Andrea saying it, that yeah, the vacancy rate in the CBD and the DTC is double what it is in Aurora, right? So that's interesting to be aware of. But more characteristics that we wanted to highlight is the age of the product type in Aurora. And as Andrea mentioned, since 2005, we really virtually not built anything outside the campus, outside, one building and some other medical office buildings around town. And so the buildings that are newer than 25 years old, so built post 1998, roughly, their vacancy rate is half of what our overall vacancy rate is, right? And that's an interesting breakdown of the data that we thought is really has and it's been a trend of the pandemic and post-pandemic era. To Bob's point, hopefully we stop using this word here shortly. And what we've noticed is companies want to be in that newer space, and we'll get into that a little bit more later of why. The vacancy rate for older buildings, right, that were built before 1998, which is the majority of our market, is higher, obviously, right? And so it's nearly 12%. And, it's oscillated between, 10 and 20% over the last decade or so that I've been tracking it as well. So just to put that in perspective. On the absorption statistics and characteristics of that, it has been negative, right? We've only had 3 quarters of positive absorption since we went remote and since companies had to mandated or not decided to have people stay in their homes or work remotely. And, that accommodation is definitely felt, right? Our overall vacancy rate was 5 or 6% before the pandemic, and then it jumped. Now it's up right to that 9 to 9.6%. So it's definitely an impact. We haven't ignored it. We've talked to companies that have been thinking about downsizing and consolidating and relocating, and so it's definitely a factor that we just live with, and we've been working with a lot of tenants that are in our market and not in our market, talking about all of that and those trends. A little bit of that is tied into, or a lot of that is tied into the capital markets as well, and what's going on, generally speaking, with companies and tenants being able to work with developers and the financing behind deals to get into newer space. Again, we'll get to some of that a little later. Activity wise, just wanted to point out, even though the absorption has been negative, negative trend, activity for leases is still relatively decent. It's 2/3 of what we saw, what we were seeing before the pandemic hit, which is higher than a lot of industry folks actually told us it would be, in 2020 and 2021. We were hearing from the real estate community and brokers and companies that, yeah, we're not going to sign any leases for 5 years, right? Because we don't want to make decisions that will be, have long-term effects. A lot of leases are shorter for that reason. If you saw 5 to 7 year leases get signed for office space, regardless of the quantity of space, it's now 2 to 3 years, right? Windows that companies will commit to, just because everything's still, as Andrea said at the beginning, still changing, still evolving in this world, or in this realm. So wanted to point out the next point, that the activity that we've seen, our office has seen specifically, right, in terms of RFPs that we get from a variety of office users specifically, not any other users, has been relatively the same. So we never saw a real dip, other than maybe March 2020 to May 2020, where nobody was doing anything. After that, the level of activity that we've seen in terms of prospects has been the same, and this is specifically toward the office market. We think that's positive, because we think that that's an indicator that companies are still considering the metro area, Aurora markets, for their operations. They might not be able to pull the trigger just yet, 3 years later even, but I think that's a good sign that we're still on the map. We're still talking to folks. We're still getting those RFPs, and data is coming in. And lastly, I wanted to point out the major uses of all of this space, right? The 10.5 million square feet of our market, majority of the space is occupied by aerospace companies, defense-related contractors, healthcare-related, medical space, whether it's hospitals or medical office, like the new building being built. I was disappointed we couldn't add the new medical office building being built on E470 and I-70. That's a nice 80,000 square foot building that we'll add to our next presentation next year, maybe as a new build. And so a lot of it is on Fitzsimmons, of course, and they've built up a handful of buildings which are great and amazing. We just had some site selectors out last week here from across the country, and we went into the new health sciences research building, and they were just wowed on the top floor where Steve Van Erden was talking to them about coming to work here versus anywhere else in the country. So it shows well. We do have some headquarters that occupy space, and some data centers that occupy office buildings. They're the older type that we've had for decades, not necessarily the new development that we've been talking with council about more recently. And then I just wanted to list some of those companies that aren't in those industries. So 210 is a home warranty company. Citywide is a bank. Avitas is a headquarters for business services. Primoris is in renewable energy. iBeta is a technology company. Flexential is a data center. I threw that in there. And they all have spaces between 25,000 and 75,000 square feet. So just wanted to put that out there as an example of some of those major companies that are here. And the rest of them, the Raytheons, the hospitals, the Karchers we'll get to on the next page, those are all larger users. They fit into that 10% of the market that aren't small businesses, that are the majority of our market. So with that, I'll stop, and I think I'll turn it back over to Andrea in our next slide.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the trends that we mentioned earlier and what we're seeing happen. So the first thing that we talked about was this, and that we're hearing about both anecdotally and what we're seeing from people, is this flight to quality. As vacancies have occurred, particularly in the larger office buildings, it has freed up space for either subleasing or movement within the market, right? And so we are seeing in both markets companies making moves. We haven't really seen a change of activity. People are just saying, okay, well, now here's my opportunity to make a move to something a little cheaper, or maybe I can go and do something a little smaller. So what we're seeing in Aurora in particular is that companies that may have been previously downtown, now they're more remote, maybe they need less space. And guess what? Aurora's rental rates are more attractive than where they previously may have been located as a tenant in a larger building, where they were paying a lot more. And so we're seeing some of the companies come here, and they come for amenities and dynamic spaces, shorter commutes perhaps. And so the spaces that we have that are newer, people are moving up into them, both inside the Aurora market as well as coming from outside and in Denver. Outside in like the tech center, or moving from Denver into Aurora, because our spaces are nice. We've been building some newer spaces, and they're looking for maybe smaller footprints. And this is particularly in the smaller markets as well. So also what we're seeing is moves from Denver for smaller footprints, and great shorter commutes and greater access and things like that. So we believe that Aurora's market actually can fill this niche of the smaller spaces. That's what our market is primarily, but what we're seeing is increasing demand for some smaller spaces. And as we see people moving around and spaces get filled up in the newer spaces, there's probably opportunity for us to maximize what we do with some of the spaces, increasing the amenities in some of the B spaces and bringing them up by putting in more amenities and the things that people are looking for as they're looking to make moves. So we can maybe invest in updating our B spaces to make them more competitive in the marketplace. The other thing is we're seeing a decrease in some of those C spaces, and we think there's more out there because there are people, for example, that are officing in what would traditionally be like retail space and so forth. As that happens, it creates opportunities for us. It can mean two things. Number one is it can mean that the spaces are going to go vacant and become blighted, and they may be those C spaces. Therefore, people will disinvest in those spaces, creating what we believe to be opportunities for redevelopment. So we should keep our eye on a lot of those spaces and see where they are and locationally, and look for opportunities to redevelop those spaces into brand new buildings that will cause us to have higher rents and also let us reposition land for new buildings and new opportunities in the market. So we would do things like retrofit first floors for retail, add co-working spaces and suites, make spaces more flexible, and again, increase the supply of smaller, more flexible spaces for the market, both for people attracting new people, putting new businesses in, and helping businesses move up and grow. As we start with new spaces, it also gives us the opportunity to kind of grow our own small business companies, because if they start small, and we're seeing a lot of this in tech, and we're seeing a lot of it also in the medical fields, where higher tech companies start with smaller space, but they very, very quickly grow and bring in other people, and then they're going to need larger spaces as well. So we can also use smaller spaces and better smaller spaces as a way to grow our own business community. So that's on the small business side. I'm turn it over to Yuri for the larger businesses and the more aggressively growing businesses.
Thanks, Andrea. So just to, wrapping up this conversation of where we're going, right, and where we're headed, now that you have more facts in front of you, and now that we understand that, we're more oriented towards accommodating smaller businesses, less footprints, that doesn't mean that we don't go after the bigger fish, right, as you very well know. So the outer ring product, and so we now are not just a suburban market, we're an outer ring market is how we're referred to. And the folks that we've been talking to since March of 2020 have right away recognized that these corridors, right, and I'm thinking E470 being a major corridor, 225 being a major corridor, where you have a lot of people that live in those markets and that don't have to drive. The average, I think, is just over half an hour in this community, although since Labor Day, it's ticked up for me at least a little bit, driving around, going to meetings. It's imperative to understand that we have a lot of workforce, a lot of skilled workforce, some unskilled workforce, that the location quotients are high enough to attract the companies to say, oh, we can build a campus, and the campus is a different term now than it used to be, where, you know, you would read about, you know, the large Fortune type companies building out, you know, in Michigan and Texas and the East Coast, and have, you know, thousands of acres and tens and dozens of buildings, and they're all kind of connected. And we saw what happened in Silicon Valley with those kind of headquarters. These are different here. So campuses here mean the Karchers of the world, the WICs of the world. So Karcher, I think everybody's familiar with. They moved their North American headquarters here, and they actually opened right before the pandemic, and then had to go back home. And so that building, that's a picture of it on the left there. 3-story office, 90,000 square feet of office, and behind that you have the training facilities, the R&D facilities, the warehouse, the production space, all of that in an industrial building, right? Same with on the right, this building for Western Industrial Contractors, their North American headquarters as well. They opened just across the street from Karcher, just as we were aiming for, right? To attract kind of a cluster of these kind of companies. They service a lot of the e-commerce world, and build out conveyor systems and engineer a lot of systems that go into industrial buildings. They have about 150,000 square feet. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned Karcher's a total of 380,000 square feet. So 90,000 square feet of office, and then the industrial section behind is much larger. WIC is the same way, 150,000 square foot building. About 50,000 of that is their office and headquarters and administrative space. And then the other 100,000 square feet is their industrial floor plate in the back. And you can tell that I'm not a great photographer because I took the picture on the right. Karcher's picture is a professionally made picture that their marketing department gave us. So I apologize for that, but they do have their, WIC does have their logos on the building. They look great if you're driving by it. And so what, you know, these companies want is everything in one spot. As Andrea was saying, they want dynamic space. They want access to their workforce for sure, but they also want access to open space and other amenities. We have some business parks building basketball courts now, and, you know, other amenities for their workforce. That's the type of activity outside the office space or outside, you know, the other space that these buildings have that people want to do if they're going into the office, right? And spending a majority of their days and weeks there. So I think we're going to see a lot of that, and they have to be flexible. They have to be, you know, nimble to what their people want and how they get their workforce in, their skilled workforce, their unskilled workforce in, their clientele in, right? Because both of these companies fly in a bunch of people to look at their products, to meet with their executives, to do a lot more than just bring in people that live in the community 8 to 5. So we're going to continue working on these type of deals, I think, more and more. And I think we have a lot of opportunity along the 470 corridor, right? And, you know, looking at the Windler development, the Aurora Highlands development, and even down south in between Buckley and Murphy Creek, there's a lot of land. There's still a lot of land, hundreds of acres. And in Windler and Aurora Highlands, I know particularly, do have all of the E470 frontage dedicated to commercial, right? And that's where these buildings can go. We're not going to have residential fences up along E470 as we drive by. We're going to have these kind of buildings out there. And if it's not these kind of buildings, Andrea and I have talked about some prospects that would build 4 to 6 story office buildings as well that are smaller footprint. You know, they don't take 10 acres. I think WIC sits on about 10 acres of land. They would sit on 4 or 5 acres of land, and it's more dense, and it's more, you know, maybe even a structured parking lot or a shared parking lot with retail next door, and maybe some multifamily next door. So that's what I mean by mixed use campuses and mixed use buildings. And we just need to stay flexible and allow them to come in and work with us. And these are just 2 examples. And we're working with a group right now that needs 100,000 square feet. And they're not sure exactly if that's just pure office building or if they'll need even additional space outside of the office to combine it. And that's the kind of problem solving we're doing right now. And just wanted to leave you that the next generation of product will probably look more like this than what the tech center looks like right now, right? And I think we've been talking to our neighbors in the tech center and downtown Denver. A lot of that is going to be retrofitted, right? So those office buildings, those numbers, they're not going to be building a lot of newer product unless it's particular built to suit for certain type of companies. A lot of those might turn into data centers, might turn into residential, might be scraped if they're 40 or 50-year-old office buildings, and allow for new product type to come in. So there's a lot of that going on. We're fortunate to have some greenfield, in our opinion, that line Z470, and even the transit-oriented development sites at Metro Center and 2nd and Abilene and 13th Avenue and on the north side of Fitzsimmons. Definitely don't want to miss that the bioscience community also would be great operating in these types of buildings. They're probably going to be smaller footprints, right? But the lab spaces, the bioscience 2, 3, 4 buildings, they're all like this, right? They're 2 to 3 stories. There's a lot of lab in there, but those are office buildings, right? Those are Class A office buildings. So just don't want to forget that we can put more on Fitzsimmons, more along our transit-oriented stops when RTD is back, running in a better way, and we look forward to helping more companies land here. I'll stop there.
Okay, is that the end of your presentations?
Yes. And do we have any questions?
Question.
Or comments?
Let's see. May I just make a comment? This is not really office space, but of course there was Ambrose opening ceremony last week, and I think today is Crane Logistics, and there's just a lot going on out here. It's hard to keep up, but thanks for the good work you do in attracting this type of economic activity to the city.
Councilmember Lawson, do you have any questions?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. And then I just do have a question, just when we're thinking about, different diversity in our businesses, our business climate. And I think I brought this up over and over again throughout my years on council. But has there ever been a thought, and I have just 2 comments on that, 2 questions on this, about looking at some of these spaces for some maybe more of, co-op type innovation for within our community. And I know that we've done some of this stuff over in the bioscience and in Ward 1, but just within maybe some different ideas, or maybe some companies can come in, or there could be some companies, or maybe within our own community, that we could use some of this space to have more, maybe like a co-op space for different type of innovation businesses. It doesn't have to be one specific. And then my second question is, there's a lot of businesses that don't have any space at all. I know in DC, you could rent like a space for like $200 or whatever, where you could have your meetings. You have a phone line, but you might have a consulting business or something like that, but you don't have a space. So instead of meeting at a coffee shop, you do have a space that you are kind of renting for certain business, for your businesses that you may have, or something like that. I think I've seen something like that in some of the major cities. And I know we're not DC, but I'm just trying to talk about different ways that we can get our own people who have entrepreneurships here that can't maybe afford a space, but maybe they can rent a space because it's in a co-op model, or it's in some type of not really a WeWork model, but just where they can rent a space in somewhere and do whatever kind of business that they're into. So I was just wondering, has there been any ideas on that, or maybe some concepts on that kind of utilization of these spaces beyond what you're speaking about?
Andrea, do you mind me responding real quickly?
Oh, no, of course.
So yes, thank you, council member, and definitely hear you. And we've been working with both types of users, right? The innovation hub sort of collaboratives that are looking to be in the metro area. And Andrea and I drove around with the gentleman a couple months ago this summer, talking exactly about that. And then in terms of co-working space, we've talked to several of those companies. Thrive just coming to the top of my mind as one of those companies that has a couple of different offices in Denver, in Cherry Creek, in other markets and along the Front Range, and talking to them about what that looks like here. We actually have co-working space for industrial users as well. I know that's a little different than and not the topic of this conversation, but it definitely is attractive to people to be able to have some of those resources available when they are either sole proprietors or a startup or a small business, and they don't want to go out there and get into a long-term lease for all those. And so we haven't seen, unfortunately, any really set up shop quite yet, right? And on a large scale, but they do come and talk with us, and we continuously tell them the benefits of being in Aurora and closer to, the workforce and all the amenities that we have. And it ties into the retail trends as well that Bob was speaking of earlier, and what that looks like. So we do have those conversations. I think we don't have to be, to your comment, Councilmember Lawson, a DC necessarily. There's just a number of those facilities around town, right? And so they all were going to more central business districts and more tech center type environments before the pandemic. So I think they're just struggling to kind of make, land in markets like ours, just because of how capital markets are and how it is to finance these kind of deals and figure things out, because it is a little bit more risky, right, than a traditional office user that just goes in and signs a lease. So I'll stop there. Andrea, I'm sure, has more.
Councilmember Bergan, can I just kind of comment and just my question? Maybe I need to talk about
Sure.
what I want to say about this question. I understand that you're going out and into companies, but I wonder if there's something that the city has talked about or maybe could consider, and I don't know what kind of initiative it would be. There's a lot of sole proprietorship people that live in this community that have consulting businesses. They want a space to make, instead of using Zoom, maybe they need a meeting space to go and meet with clients and things like that. But I don't know what the fee would be. That's kind of what, when you go to DC, they offer those type of spaces where it has a phone line, people can come there. It's their space that they're renting within a bigger floor or something like that. It's not really a WeWork concept. It's not really that. It's just really kind of a thing that they offer to people who are sole proprietors or people who have professional business, not just in industry, but different types, consulting businesses, maybe they're on their own tax business, but they just can't afford to lease a space in a city, like an actual business space, but they have a place where they can meet with clients and they pay a certain fee or anything like that. I don't know what it's called. I just know the concept. So I guess I'm just trying to see if there's something like that could be built into our city for our own residents that are our sole proprietors that really can't afford spaces, but maybe we can offer them at TOD sites. Maybe it could be somewhere at an area where we could attract a lot of these entrepreneurships that are within our own community. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at as an outside concept as well.
Okay. So, council member, let me now respond on the smaller business side. We do have, first of all, we have a very aggressive cooperative business model counseling that we are doing now. And I would like to reassure you that we are working closely with a number of cooperatives in a number of different areas and helping them try to build. So, for example, the Alba Cooperative, which is a cooperative of caterers and food vendors and so on and so forth. And we are working with them on having a space and that they can utilize to do that for particularly for those type of small businesses. There is a space on Montview, by the way, that has been operating in that fashion in that neighborhood for a long time that is not the WeWorks, it's not, but they're offering space and working with small, what we would call legacy businesses that have been in the area and helping them grow. And then we help them with counseling to grow. So there are a number of opportunities, not saying that there could be more, but we are looking, as we work with cooperatives and as we work with these smaller property owners who are already located in the neighborhoods where these businesses exist, about redefining their spaces and helping them to get some of those, helping to get more clients into their spaces, which helps them in their model and helps the smaller business people as well. So some exist. We can certainly do more, and we can certainly work with the resources that we've got to expand that concept into more needy neighborhoods.
Okay, I appreciate that. I guess I'm still not getting my question clarified. I guess, let me just provide the example. I'm Angela Lawson. I have a consulting business. I don't want to just be at home. I want to meet with my clients. I want to have the ability to maybe in the city of Aurora, meet with the client, maybe have a space where I have a phone line where I could stay at that space and rent that space. I'm not really part of a co-op. I'm just an individual business person that just has a kind of a startup business and wants to meet with clients and have that ability to have a space where I can meet with the client and pay a fee or something like that.
That's
And it's not just me independently. There may just be different people with different spaces. So
Add something.
I understand. I'm not gonna, I just don't think what I'm trying to say is maybe clear enough, and maybe I just need to discuss it offline. So thank you for the comments and addressing my question to the degree that I was asking. I appreciate it.
May I ask something?
Go ahead. Councilman.
To Councilmember Lawson's point and idea, Andrea, isn't there such a small concept like that beneath the Six Capital Brewery in that building, the bicycle shop? There is office space down there in which
gonna bring that up. Yeah.
does that sound familiar to you guys? And I think
I was
that's
gonna bring that up, and then there's space in Southlands, to my understanding, and
Oh
unless
yes,
they've gone away.
I think that
And
might line up
Council-
with Councilmember Lawson's vision for this type of
You know,
stuff.
And the space on
Councilmember
Montview,
Lawson-
the space on Montview is like that as well. It's tiny. It's not very large,
small.
and they have a couple of storefronts, and then they have space in the back that they rent to, people who want just a place to meet or just want, a phone line and things like that. So there are spaces we could probably do a better job of working, identifying where those spaces are and helping people get to those spaces.
And
Yeah, I
and
think
the-
if we could just, if there are people that want that, could we connect them with your office?
Absolutely.
And just quickly, Councilmember Lawson, Thrive is exactly, I think, what you're talking about. I might be mistaken, but I think that's exactly what you're talking about. So I hear you, and I think we can, if you're talking about private sector funded space versus publicly funded space, maybe that's where your question is missing my mark, but that's not my area of expertise. But if there could be an incentive program for more offices, I'm all ears.
I have a couple questions. Just the Majestics and the Corporex and, that have so much, tens of thousands, millions of square feet. Are they doing well in leasing their space?
So in terms of office space, or
Yeah, the office space, sorry.
okay, because I don't think Majestic, other than their corporate office, I don't think they have much space. So so offices, again, in general, are surviving. Their vacancy rate is relatively decent, right? It's not above our 10-year running average, if you will, right? As Andrea pointed out. So, there's leasing activity going on. I think we're in for some headwinds in the next 12 to 18 months with with debt coming up, right? Because the valuations of office buildings have plummeted, right? So that's definitely a factor. and that might cause some turmoil and some changes. But again, to Andrea's point, it's probably an opportunity for us to kind of work with the development community, real estate community, and figure out who best to come in and upgrade those facilities.
Okay, and then kind of on that, you know, we're in the older parts of the city where buildings become blighted. Do we see owners of those properties just sit on it intentionally so that then the city comes in and offers incentives?
I'll let Andrea answer that one.
Thanks a lot. So yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, council member. It really depends on the motivations of that specific owner and how much debt they're carrying on the project. Some of these people have owned these spaces for a really long time and they don't have that much debt. And so they say that some of them may not want to divest of their property and give us the opportunity, but we need to be, and this is why we brought this, because I think there's going to be a lot more of this in the future as the big fallout from larger properties happen, and the older properties in particular. We need to be aggressively going through those. If we see those spaces being vacant for long periods of time, we need to come up with ways for us to address those, and I will say incentivize those people to either sell or to work with us to update the space. And we're always looking for owners / developers to improve those spaces. I mean, and I'm going to liken it to one of the retail programs. That's the whole point of like the restaurant program. Let's take a space that's functionally obsolete, perhaps for the format that it was, inject a little bit of incentive and create new spaces that operate better under the newer models of how those businesses are operating.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you said earlier
we look for that and we need to be aggressive.
Yeah, because you said earlier that they obviously tenants looking for newer, upgraded space. I guess also just with technology and so forth, that they're, you know, that's probably more attractive. So do you find that that there's more of an interest in renovating the building or just scraping it and starting all over? Like it
really depends on the condition of the building. So for example, you know, we might go in and look, if you start with good bones, you can always gut. Okay. And that's less expensive than tearing down and building new. But the question is, can you get the level of quality you want in a functionally obsolete space? And so that, you know, and we deal with those kinds of issues all the time in the redevelopment world, right? So each one, and I apologize because it doesn't sound like a real answer, but you have to evaluate them on a one-by-one basis in terms of what is the specific, and there is a lot of hand-holding involved because these are not like the big centers. For example, when we were asking about vacancies in big centers, well, it depends on who the tenant was, whether they're holding their space vacant because they don't want to let the space go, or whether or not the owner of the space, which they have a broker, is actively trying to fill that space. And we have actually, when we go to ICSC, you know this, we go to ICSC, we try to work with the brokers and say, hey, can we incentivize you to do this with that space, or bring in someone else, a credit tenant, and maybe we'll backstop them, or things like that. And we need to do the same thing with office buildings in this changing environment.
okay.
It's just a different.
Yeah, my last question is on some of the buildings, especially in the Northeast, these large buildings, do they try to incorporate like restaurants within their buildings at all, or just eating spaces?
If
Is
they
that-
don't, they need to.
They need
Yeah,
to-
we
that's what I
we
was
haven't seen
thinking.
that yet, but
We-
I think we will see that.
I
Yeah.
think we will see that, and I think that there are things that we can do if we provide assistance. I mean, I think, you see it happening in the industrial areas that people are realizing, we need to have some restaurants out here. We need to have, so we need amenities in the area because the model is moving to this. Let's be closer. Let's have a more dynamic, as Yuri said, let's have a more dynamic environment because that's what our employees now want.
Right. Yeah, they need a place to eat lunch. So, okay, well, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Councilmember
Thank
Bergan,
you.
On
Councilmember
to-
Bergan, if
Who's there?
May, Janine Restad,
Oh,
Director of
hi, Janine.
Planning and
Go ahead.
Development Services. Marcia McGilly, our Small Business Development Center, emailed us in response to Councilmember Lawson's question that just a very quick search that she did, she found 11 co-working locations within Aurora. We can do more research and see exactly what type of co-locations, if they're getting at what you're talking about, and get you additional information.
Well, that's good to know. I don't think that that's very publicized. And so, I mean, I get some questions about that. So I'm glad to know they at least have 11. I didn't even know that they had that many. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any reports. Brad Pierce is not with us today, but he did include the oil and gas report in our backup. Are there any other reports that need to be made today that I don't see? Don't think so. Okay. Well, our next meeting is scheduled for November 8th. Janine, we're probably not going to do a December meeting, so I don't know, is November going to be a full schedule because of that, or?
We are trying to fill up. I know offhand that we have the Marketing Aurora for Business, which will be a co-presentation from Aurora Communications, Visit Aurora, and AEDC. Andrea has her hand up. I'm sure she knows. I think she has something else.
Yeah, and our Small Business Development Center is going to make a presentation on the outreach we've done in the neighborhoods and the BIPOC businesses to increase participation in the community. So we'd like to do that as well.
Okay, great. All right.
And then the final item is the annual oil and gas update. So yes, we do have a full agenda for November.
Okay, and we don't have any UDO updates or anything, right, coming up?
Not at this point, no. More in the new year.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, we'll see you on November 8th. Everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.